This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about the peaceful path to connected families and restored communities. Today on the show, I'm excited to be talking about the process of developing a homeschool mission statement. We've been talking about community in this month on the podcast, and I can't emphasize enough how important having a mission statement is to creating a community around your values as a homeschool family. This is in conjunction with the Peaceful Press. It's sponsoring the show always, obviously. And I'm excited just to run through some steps for creating a homeschool mission statement. You can download a mission statement template in the show notes. So it's just a simple worksheet that can help you create more peace and presence in your homeschool. And as as I've stated before, if you want to go deeper with a homeschool mission statement or really refining your values as a family, check out the book Habits for a Sacred Home. My new book, Habits for a Sacred Home. It's on the new bestsellers list for the ECPA. And it's a great tool for really evaluating what your family values are and living more in tune with those family values. So before I start talking about your mission statement, I just want to share about some of the progress families in the Restoration Home community are experiencing as they work towards their family vision and purpose. Carly Ann shared, she said, I want to share about our slow and steady progress making big strides in our home. We've been consistently reading a psalm, saying the Apostles' Creed, reading about a saint, and praying every morning. Our mornings have been so much more peaceful, and both my little ones come sit on the couch ready for morning time. It has been beautiful, an answer to prayer after a hard, chaotic year. We've also held consistent with a Bible story and the Lord's Prayer right before bedtime. She says, my 15-month-old can now say Bible as she excitedly runs in the room for our sweet family Bible time. Can you imagine how cute that would be? She's sleeping so much better. This is such good news for our family, and I'm grateful for the encouragement of this community. The Restoration Home community is closed right now. We're having our yearly retreat in October in Thompson Station, Tennessee. But keep your calendar, like make a note on your calendar because we'll open again in January. And so, in order to form a community to support your value, we need to know what's important to us. And earlier in the podcast and in our Restoration Home community, and even in the Peaceful Life workshop, we'll also link that. I asked families to define what you want your children to remember about life in your home. And, kind of decide like what is the atmosphere you want your children to experience when they wake up in the morning, what are the smells and the feelings that you want them to experience? When you are having your homeschool day, what are the strongest emotions or even scents that you want your children to experience in your homeschool? So really having this idea, like what do we want our children to remember about life in our home, can help us be more thoughtful and intentional about how we schedule out our homeschool and what things we add into our homeschool. And the Peaceful Press resources were created to give you that kind of margin to be thoughtful and to create precious memories. Many families write, I want my children to remember that they were loved by us and by God, or I want my children to remember that our home was a cozy, safe place. And so there's things that we want our children to remember, but when we over schedule ourselves and add in a lot of tedious workbooks or add in a bunch of co-op activities, what we can often end up experiencing in our homes is rushing, chaos, frustration, tears. But that doesn't have to be the way it is. And that's, I think, for most of us, not what we want. As I was working through these steps with a group of moms locally, we also talked about what we experienced in our own childhoods, because sometimes what we want for our children and what we experienced are so different. And it might take a process of grieving and forgiving for you to kind of create peace and alignment between what you want and what you experienced. In my book, Mothering by the Book, I talk about how important it is to take time to grieve before you can enter a new season. And so I think this is something that you really want to also kind of be thoughtful and praying about. Maybe read Mothering by the Book. read Habits for a Sacred Home, and work through some of these processes so that when you're making family values for your family, your own family, you aren't making them based on somebody else's experience or your experience of childhood or even like a reaction to your experience of childhood. We want to be whole people who welcome the wholeness of God, the shalom of God, the nothing broken and nothing missing in our homes. And part of that process of having our homes be peaceful and be places of refuge is just taking time to weed out all the old stuff, praying through forgiveness or maybe even sometimes getting some counseling if we've had a lot of trauma in our lives. So then talking about what we want from our homeschool, why are we homeschooling? And homeschooling can look like all different things. Some families love being academic academic excellence, and they want their children to be in speech and debate, and they want to have a very classical education. And you can do that with a literature-based approach with, the peaceful press where you read beautiful stories out loud and you narrate, you write down what you read, you summarize, you talk about what you read. And then in a classical education, you probably add more memorization. You'd memorize grammar terms and states and presidents, and you would do the timeline song. So it'd be a little bit more memorization perhaps in the early years than maybe in a more of a Charlotte Mason home or and then there are families who love music though, and they want to make playing music, learning instruments, they want to make that a bigger part of their homeschool routine and their family routine. There are other families who really love homesteading. And so a bigger part of their homeschool might be spending time learning about agriculture projects or building things together or planting a garden together. And so there isn't necessarily one right way to homeschool. Like I believe that a literature based approach as descript as kind of depicted in the book In Vital Harmony by Karen Glass is one of the best ways to give our children a deep education, not just a shallow, like, here's some facts. Can you remember these facts? But actually a deep education that shapes character. So I believe that the Charlotte Mason method is the best for that. But there are lots of ways, lots of resources as well. In the Peaceful Press resources, we emphasize books that really highlight virtuous people and highlight virtuous character and highlight values that are important to our family, like grit and perseverance and love and community and generosity and kindness. But there might be another set of books that's more appealing to you. A book list like Ambleside Online, which includes more of the original Charlotte Mason literature that was available in England in the turn of the century, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Those might be the books that are more appealing to your family. You might enjoy, sort of a more modern approach where you just include a lot of modern books. So there are many ways to educate our children, but I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I think are important in homeschooling your children. Charlotte Mason said, few of us know definitely what we propose to ourselves in the education of our children, and we don't know what is possible to affect. And so then the results of our education are very inadequate and unsatisfactory. And she says that in school education. I think it's important if you're just getting started homeschooling to read a book like Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto, because if you can look at the government school system from an objective view and just sort of understand, oh, okay, they are teaching to tests. They are pushing things that aren't developmentally appropriate for some children, and they are putting their own view of virtue into the minds of our children. And that view of virtue might not actually be your family view of virtue. There's, a high emphasis on stories of victimhood. One of my kids was doing a public school history textbook as part of a charter school class. And there's a high proportion of stories that are sad stories, that are victim stories, and actually not a lot of redemption or hope in those stories. And so there is a worldview, there is virtues that are being taught in a government school system, and are they yours? And so being aware that some school systems are going to emphasize values that might not actually be yours. And so as you are planning out what is important to you in education, kind of having a wide view of what it means to educate our children, what they need actually is so important. So Charlotte Mason says the idea of all education springing from and resting upon our relation to Almighty God is one which we have ever labored to enforce. we take a very distinct stand upon this point. We do not merely give a religious education because that would seem to imply the possibility of some other education, but we hold that all education is divine, that every good gift of knowledge and insight comes from above, and that the Holy Spirit is the supreme educator of mankind. And the culmination of all education is that personal knowledge of and intimacy with God, in which our being finds its fullest perfection. And so Charlotte Mason would propose that the culmination of education is really our knowledge of and intimacy with God. And then John Ruskin, an early education philosopher, said the entire object of true education is to make people not merely do the right things, but enjoy the right things. Not merely industrious, but to love industry. Not merely learned, but to love knowledge. Not merely pure, but to love purity. Not merely just, but to hunger and thirst after justice. And then in Deuteronomy 6:4-9, it says that these things which I have taught you today, speaking of the word of God, the laws of God, you should keep them, bind them on your house, bind them on your forehead, teach them to your children as you walk, as you rise up, as you lie down. And so, based on these things, I think virtue, teaching our children a godly worldview, should actually be one of our big homeschool missions. It should be a really important part of educating our children because we won't have a tomorrow. In a recent blog post, I talked about some of the founding father quotes about virtue, about how we can't have a republic. We can't have a constitutional form of government without a virtuous people. So if people are going to vote for policies that are just based on selfishness and not based on what is good for the economy, for the people, for children, then you're going to lose your government. You're going to get totalitarianism. You're going to get um, just a very despotic form of government. But if people have virtue, then they'll have sense about what is important and what actually works, even because I think a lot of policies can be proposed that might sound nice and kind, but actually create a lot of havoc. For instance, during COVID, there's a lot of money printed as relief. Like, people got checks, like $1,200 checks. Woo, we can help pay for groceries. But now, just a couple of years later, groceries have doubled because of that influx of money into the economy. And so I think it's important to actually understand what policies, the impact that policies have. And this is part of teaching our children to be virtuous and not just be short-sighted or motivated only by their own personal gain. So I'm going to talk about my own personal motto as well. My personal motto is earth's crammed with heaven and every common bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. That's Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And so as I was homeschooling my own children, I really wanted us to have margin in our days to be able to pray or read a great story. I wanted to have margin to be able to stop and work through a discipline issue. If we were dealing with behavior problems, things come up when you're homeschooling, right? Like people have little fights or siblings aren't getting along or someone's extra wiggly during morning time. And in my homeschool, I wanted to have margin so that I could pause and take care of the needs of my child instead of just rushing through the lesson or feeling all kinds of pressure. And so, this motto from Elizabeth Barrett Browning kind of points to that Moses, he wasn't rushing, he was slowing down, and he noticed the burning bush and led his people to freedom because he was slowing down enough to listen to God. So I homeschool so I can tailor the education to each unique child and give them time to pursue personal interests. I homeschool my children to help them love virtue and give them an awareness of God so they can follow his lead. I homeschool so I can give my children valuable life skills. In the Peaceful Press resources, we include valuable life skills training. So our children not only have a well-developed intellect, but they also have motor skills and skills in even the scientific process, like baking a loaf of bread. Will it rise or will it not? It depends on if you get the water temperature right and if the yeast isn't too old and if you put in the right amount of flour and sugar and, so there's so many scientific processes that happen when we do projects together. And so That's part of my reasons for homeschooling. So, how about you? Why have you decided to embark on this intense adventure of homeschooling? Now would be a great time to just write down some of those values. We did this in a workshop last night, and some of the things people said were, for freedom, we want to have the freedom to travel when we want to go places, to stay at home. We don't want to be in a car pickup line. Some people said they wanted to homeschool for virtue. They wanted to get the best hours of their children's days. They wanted to be able to give their children a healthier life physically without the stress of, being in a fluorescent lights all day, things like that. Um, there was Some people wanted just more time in nature, or they wanted more time to read the books that they were important to them. Many people mentioned that they wanted to be able to train their children in virtue and really help them know God and not just be, have a shallow faith. And so there were some beautiful reasons that came up last night. What are some of your reasons? Write them down and then look kind of at the top reasons, because as you are looking at your values as a family, and Habits for a Sacred Home really walks you through the process of developing a family rule of life that can guide you through your days with your children, the fleeting years of childhood. As you have this very clear, it's going to be easier then to opt out of an activity that's not serving your family well, or to not be afraid of taking a different path with your children during a season where actually what you need is more time, or actually what you need is more community. So once you've taken those top reasons, you've written down, brainstormed what your reasons are for homeschooling, and then taken your top reasons and highlighted them, take time to write a paragraph. You could write just a really short one and put it on your wall so that you remember on those hard days, like, why am I doing this when everyone's crying over the math problems and I'm ready to just totally numb out? Why am I doing this? So one of our overarching statements for the Pepito family was that we homeschool so our children can pursue a relationship with God, their own dreams, and a loving and connected family life. You might have something like, we homeschool to create lifelong learners who see the world through the eyes of God. Our students will graduate knowing they are smart, capable, valuable individuals who can work within their gifts to complete the calling God has placed on their lives. Or we homeschool to create an independent, well mannered child who sees the value in God and has great family values. And in my Pepito family mission statement, we also talked about other values that we have. We value a relationship with God, and homeschooling gives us the time and freedom to do this. We value a connected family with good communication skills and the ability to work through conflict and walk in love. Homeschooling gives us the time to develop a connected family. We value personal development and a strong sense of self. We want our children to have a time to pursue their own interests, to wonder and be quiet with God. Homeschooling gives our children this time. We value creativity. We want our children to have their own style and be their own person. Homeschooling gives them the freedom to pursue their unique gifts. We value simplicity and being detached from a consumeristic rat race. We don't want our children to be thoughtless consumers, but we want them to buy only what they need and what will make life more beautiful and hospitable. Homeschooling helps us detach from the system. So we had quite a few statements on our purpose for homeschooling. And that kind of always brought me back when I had a decision to make, like, is this going to be a good fit, or would something else work better? Having wisdom, having ideas about what was really important to us made such a difference in creating a homeschool routine that served our family well. And the beauty of having a really clear homeschool mission statement is that it can also help you develop community. When we are homeschooling, it is really important to have some people in your corner, some people who believe in what you're doing, some people who are also in the same fight with you. When you're trying to raise a connected family, it's going to be hard if all of your friends are doing things that are super different. Like, if all your friends are putting their kids in school and you're trying to homeschool, you're going to feel a little isolated in that project. If all of your friends are doing a new co-op every single day and you're the only one who stays home 4 days a week, you're going to have a hard time feeling comfortable and confident in that. And having clear family values will help, but also having a few friends who have a similar mind to you can also be so productive. In our favorite homeschooling community, there were so many different kinds of families. Some of them were more attuned to the care of the environment than us. And I was inspired to start packing our lunches in mason jars instead of in Ziploc. Some of the families in that group were more in tune to just quiet home rhythms than me. And I was inspired to be okay with more days at home so I could have more time with my children. Some of the families in that group really pursued excellence in physical fitness, and their children were progressing really nicely in things like jujitsu, and that inspired me as well. And so I could look at these. They were all homeschooling in their own way. Everybody was trying to do the best they could to be attuned to their own child and be responsive to what their children needed, and so I could look at those friends, I had my values clarified and I could learn from them, but also not be in shame or guilt if I wasn't doing exactly the same thing as them. And so I think it's really important that as you're homeschooling, first get your own values established. And in Habits for a Sacred Home, we guide you through these, through establishing values as a family. If you want a little quicker path towards that, grab the Peaceful Life Workshop. We'll link it in the profile or in the show notes. And so establish your values and then start inviting community around you who share those values. And for us, one of the best things that we did to create community was having a co-op. And I often started my own. I'll link a podcast or I'll link a video in the show notes and a blog post that talks a little bit more about starting your own homeschool co-op. So many families have used the Peaceful Press resources in their co-op. And so they do the morning time at home, they read the stories, they do the copy work at home, but then once a week they gather and do the projects. And it was so much fun for our family. The year that we did the Kind Kingdom together in our community, we had all the kids 1 month bring in their Mott and Bailey. That was one of the projects in the Kind Kingdom, is to make it's an early form of a castle. And it was so much fun to see the creativity that these students portrayed. One of them brought a Mott and Bailey cake. Some of them used popsicle sticks. Some of them used twigs. It was the creativity in that community was so inspiring. And we all had many shared values. We shared a love of the outdoors. We shared a love of literature-based learning. We shared a love of the Lord. And so it's easy to find common ground, but then also grow and be inspired by the creativity and the diligence in each of these families. So I hope you also can, start a co-op, grab one of the Peaceful Press resources, download our co-op guides, and start learning in community and really living by your family values. Thanks for joining today. We'll link all these resources in the show notes. And as always, you can go to thepeacefulpress.shop to grab life-giving, literature-based homeschool curriculum.